What's up, y'all? Draft Sickos is live here on the No Ceilings NBA YouTube channel. We are also on your podcast player of choice. I'm Stephen Gillespie, kind of steering the ship a little bit today. My co-host Maxwell is off doing family activities. Everything's fine. He's just a little vacation for the weekend. But for those of you watching, you can see him. For those of you listening, I have a very special guest. One of the best writers at CBSSports.com, covers college basketball, the NBA draft, also finds time to watch and talk about golf a little bit too. You may have heard him on shows like Beyond the Arc or Eye on College Basketball podcast, or even seen him on CBS Sports Network. Ladies and gentlemen, Kyle Boone. Kyle, how are we doing today, brother?
I am doing well. Happy Memorial Day weekend to you, and hope everyone is doing all right out there. Excited to talk some NBA draft. That is a very kind intro. I would say, maybe there's 125 writers at CBS Sports. I would definitely put myself in the top 125 if
There
we
you
have
go.
125. So, that's just a fantastic way to start the show. I'm looking forward to talking Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, Egor Demin. We'll get to a bunch of stuff here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we have a very fun slate of guests. But first, Kyle, the obligatory little bit, tell us about yourself for the audience out there. So you've been part of CBS Sports since, I believe, 2016 is what I have. Is that something that you've always wanted to do? And then how did you ultimately end up getting with CBS, man?
Yeah, no. So I've always loved sports. I think probably just growing up around baseball, around basketball, that's always been just kind of my passion. I studied healthcare administration in college. I got a master's degree in health and business administration. Went into the corporate world. I actually studied, having studied healthcare administration and business. I worked in insurance for a little bit. I worked in financial analysis. And if you've fallen asleep by now, this is exactly why I left, because, for me, just the 8 to 5 thing just did not work. I could not be put in a box. And I've always had a passion for writing. In fact, maybe I shouldn't say this, but part of how I made money in college was I would write papers for my friends. And so I just always enjoyed writing. I thought that was always a way for me to kind of express myself, and had a buddy whose name is Kyle Porter, a great friend of mine who worked at CBS Sports since 2011. He's doing his own thing now, but had his own Oklahoma State sports blog. And being from Oklahoma, I've always been into Oklahoma State sports. And, I worked at that blog for a few years, kind of built up, a Rolodex of people that I got familiar with, and produced a lot of blogs about everything from Mike Gundy's mullet to T. Boone Pickens's crazy comments, and just kind of got to know the media space a little bit. And then in 2016, got basically an opportunity at CBS Sports where they were hiring for a college basketball writer, and I jumped at the chance. And I had been in in healthcare and finance, and just decided I would take the leap. I'm leaving it entirely. And that's what I did. I haven't looked back. It's worked out really well for me. And, we've got 2 kids. I have a lovely wife who's supported me throughout all of this. And it's crazy to think how much things have changed. And certainly I had no designs on, eventually becoming someone who would be involved in college basketball, NBA draft. This space is super fun. So I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Sometimes it just comes down to shooting your shot, and burning the ships a little bit. And I think the statute of limitations on writing your college paper is probably long since passed. So I think you probably still get to keep the degree. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't even have to say, because I have 2 degrees. So I won't say exactly which school it was, but it was one of the 2 schools. But yeah, that was part of my experience in grooming my writing chops, I would say. And, I ended up doing a lot of English classes. I enjoyed reading books, and that's, I'm kind of a book nerd. So all of that has, kind of culminated to me doing this profession and doing it just with a full heart, because I just love writing. I love reading. I love interviewing. All of that just is kind of perfectly rolled up into my role at CBS right now.
And I would say that your role at CBS has worked out great for both you and the audience as well, man. I'll tell you too, like one of my favorite articles, and I'm not just blowing smoke. I find it super interesting, is one of your more recent pieces, because I feel like the basketball space, a lot of times it's about the same topics, but one subject that you wrote on that I wanted to ask about in particular was from Tennessee's Zakai Zeigler, who just applied for a 5th year of eligibility in the NCAA. Actually has a case opened up against the NCAA right now. A lot of our audience might be thinking like, okay, Steven, big deal. A player wants to play in college basketball for a 5th year. We've seen this before. We've seen 6 years. Why is this such a big deal? But Kyle, I would say that this is actually a pretty unique case. Could you explain to our audience what makes this such a unique case?
Yeah, so Zakai Zeigler has filed a lawsuit against the NCAA. He's seeking a 5th year of eligibility, and it makes it unique only in that he's the first non-junior college player to sue the NCAA for an additional year of eligibility. And his representation in the lawsuit argues that Ziegler is part of the first class that was not able to benefit from the additional COVID year that players in previous classes were able to benefit. So, he can't get NIL opportunities because he doesn't have a 5th year. And I think in the argument in the case, they argue that his ability to generate money and to profit off his name, image, and likeness has been unduly restricted. So, I talked to, as you mentioned, the article, which is on CBS Sports, I talked to a lawyer who kind of specializes in NIL and that type of law. And, basically said, like, if Ziegler is successful in this case, and I think there maybe is legs to stand on, then he would obviously be granted an additional year of eligibility. But I think it could open up a can of worms for similar players post-COVID to seek a 5th year of eligibility. And, maybe that avalanches into something where basically all NCAA players are granted 5 years of eligibility. The thing with Ziegler is, he had 4 years of eligibility. He played 4 years within his 5-year window. He didn't redshirt. And so and going back to his case, the lawsuit that I got from his law firm is basically arguing that, like, he was unfairly punished for not redshirting. So, I think the way that they set it up in the lawsuit could be interesting. There's certainly going to be a lot of discussion around whether he can win in this case, because I think a lot of people would obviously be very interested. He's one of the best point guards in college basketball, and I think a lot of similar prospects in that boat who, maybe don't project as 1st or 2nd round NBA draft picks could come back to the NCAA level. And Ziegler in the case states he could be worth $2 to $3 million. So, like, it's not chump change to consider, like, the potential financial fallout for Ziegler and for other future NCAA athletes. So it's an interesting case. It's a wild world we're living in right now. I think we'll see what happens with Ziegler here pretty soon, because I think they want an answer soon so he can know, do I need to go overseas? Do I need to pursue the NBA? Like, what am I going to do? But yeah, I think it has a chance to at least set some norms and a precedent for NCAA players and potentially a 5-year window and 5 years of eligibility in the future.
That's something that I've heard proposed over, I would say, like the past 2 seasons, is that, and talking to a bunch of agents and things like that, is that the NCAA a lot of times just kind of grants these waivers because they want to avoid lawsuits such as what we're seeing with Zakai. And I hope that it's a quick turnaround. I just think that it's going to be interesting, whatever the results of the ruling is going to be. I think that it would probably do, this is purely just speculation, in my opinion, is that I think it would do the NCAA a lot more harm than good for denying him that 5th year of eligibility with the way that things have been going.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think we'll see, because as I mentioned, like, it's going to set a precedent. If he wins this case, then, essentially, I think the belief is eventually, if he wins a 5th year of eligibility, specifically in his case, he's not applying for a medical red shirt. He's not applying for some special waiver. He played 4 years, and that's how the NCAA historically has always worked. Now we've got guys who are, going overseas and doing missions work and coming back, and they're going to BYU and they're 25 years old. Like, that's happening. We've got someone who's going to play at Green Bay next season for Doug Gottlieb, who's going to be like almost 30 years old, but I believe he's a Navy veteran. And so, like, you have special cases like that. And I think the NCAA has done a good job of handling specific cases on a case-by-case basis. But the precedent that you're going to set or potentially set of granting a 5th year for a player like Zeigler, who had 4 years, he played all 4 years, like, there's no case for him to have an extra year unless you're just willing to open that can of worms. So, and maybe we're heading that way anyway. We'll see kind of how some of the legislation that's currently out there plays out. But yeah, it's a very interesting case with Zakai Zeigler from Tennessee. And obviously could set a precedent that could change kind of what the NCAA and future college athletes look like at the college level.
No doubt. All right. So let's get to some fun stuff, man. So you're somebody who covers multiple levels of basketball, and I want to get in your head a little bit. I want to kind of get in the mind of Kyle here. So someone who watches college basketball as much as you do and covers the NBA draft, you have to have like this philosophy of what you find beneficial in the translation from college to the professional league. So what does that look like for you? Is there anything that you look for in a college basketball player? This might be positionally different depending on if it's a guard or a big, whatever. Mm-hmm. But what are you looking for a player who is a good college player transitioning into the NBA?
Yeah, it definitely depends. Depends on the type. I think it's important to be kind of pliable when you're evaluating and scouting players. One thing I really value, Stephen, is the word of mouth stuff and how coaches and teammates talk about players. And having listened to the Bill Simmons podcast for like 10 years, I do think I'm in jeopardy of doing like the body language doctor. Like,
love the body language. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I actually think now I don't necessarily read into the body language per se, but I do read into how coaches, how players who played against prospects and how their teammates talk about players. And I think there's a lot to be said about that because quite frankly, you can't fake that stuff. Like a lot of coaches will say, great kid, worked really hard, always in the gym, but they may be talking about like their skill set. They may be talking, about maybe their upbringing. But like, for example, Kon Knueppel, the character, the work ethic stuff, I think that can be overplayed. But I also think that's hard to fake. And Malawach is a good example who I was at the NBA Combine 2 weeks ago. And Cooper Flagg, like just basically unprompted, is like, I love Kon. He's my guy. I think he's a super hard worker. And he's still learning the game, but like I think he has, all the traits just in terms of the character. He's easy to go along with, that type of stuff.
Sure.
That has nothing to do with like necessarily his actual skill set on the basketball floor. And I think certainly you have to have the skills, you have to have, the size, the frame, the tools to be a productive player. Malawach certainly has that, but I think if you add that on top of, he's really easy to get along with, he's gregarious, he's very fun, just someone who you kind of want in your corner. I love to go to bat for guys like that. And so like for me, I think that is very fun to watch. And something that I always keep an eye on is like, how are other people talking about you, not as a basketball player, but as a person? And, fair or not, right or wrong, I think I put like quite a bit of stock into that. One other thing I would add is, it's easy to scout the Cooper Flaggs, the Dylan Harpers, the Ace Baileys, because they're awesome and they're widely viewed as, the top 3 prospects in this class.
Sure.
But once you get past some guys in this class, I think you have to look for projectability. Like, Malawach, he's going to be a great lob threat. I think his size is going to affect how people attack him on the defensive end. And I really look for one elite trait. Are they elite at passing off the bounce like Egor Demin? Are they better at making dribble jumpers than almost anyone like a Walter Clayton Jr.? Are they really good at rebounding the basketball like a Thomas Sorber? Like, I think despite having flaws, because aside from maybe a Cooper Flagg or a Victor Wembanyama, there's not really a perfect prospect. If you have flaws, I think you can overcome a lot of that if you're elite or possibly the best at one particular thing. That's why I really like Egor Demin. That's why, I consistently kind of bet on these guys who have some holes in their game, but have a foundational skill set or skills that will translate to the NBA. So, there's a lot obviously there that I'm saying. I'm a little bit rambling, but when I'm looking at prospects, that's among the many things that I'm kind of keeping in mind and considering.
You're not rambling at all. We do a fair share of rambling here on this podcast, so you're good to go. And I think that like you did give a lot in there too. I like the intel piece. I think there are some people who are in like the public scouting community that, not that they don't value it, but you might not get intel on every prospect. So how do you adequately parse through like getting intel on one prospect, vice another, right? So that could be hard to do, but it's still important, to your point, to where I subscribe to Bill Simmons. I subscribe to the body language doctor thing as well too. So, when I'm going and watching like a Jabari Smith Jr. at Auburn go through this insane workout routine where every assistant coach has like these pads and they're just whacking him as he's driving on the way to the paint, I'm like, okay, this is cool. I know that this guy takes his workout process pretty seriously. I can buy into a player like this. I think that does.
Conversely, hey, it looks like the assistant coaches put a little oomph. Do they actually hate him like low key or? Yeah.
That's true.
I feel you, absolutely.
Yeah, there could be a little story behind the action there in that workout routine.
Yeah.
But I think that's good. And then the one skill, I think a lot of people do buy into that. One thing I want to ask you specifically, Kyle, because this is something that I've learned to value over the past couple of draft cycles, is the physicality aspect. I mean, we're seeing it in the playoffs right now. Like, how much do you assess the physicality of a prospect? Maybe not even that day one they're ready to come into the NBA and absorb that level of physicality, but maybe someday they'll be able to grow into it.
That's a tough one. Yeah, that's probably an aspect that I don't consider enough, because I think a lot of times when I'm evaluating, I'm looking at what's on paper, okay, does he measure in at a decent size with a good wingspan? Is he 6'9" with a 7'4" wingspan? Awesome. It's like, I probably, for example, this is a cross sport reference, but like Quentin Johnston from TCU, he was a first round pick with the Chargers. He's a monster freak athlete at receiver, and on paper, like, he's a great athlete, but he plays super small and he really has not translated to the NFL. And so, like, I think learning lessons from that, like, just because you have the measurables doesn't necessarily mean you have the physicality or the hands or, some of the tangible traits to translate to the NBA level. So that's something that I feel like I'm always kind of learning and evolving. And it depends on the position, depends on the context in which I'm scouting them from. Like, were they the sixth man, or are they the number one prospect, the lead initiator? Like, there's a lot that probably goes into that, but the physicality aspect, I think, is probably something that is very important. And also, like, for me, maybe undervalued in how I view prospects, but probably incorrectly, because as we're seeing right now, like, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was mic'd up last night for game 3 between Minnesota and Oklahoma City. And like, one of the initial takes he had on the bench after they lost by, I think, 41, 42 points.
Yeah.
Was they were like way more physical than us. And it shocked us basically. And obviously they hit shots, we missed shots, but their physicality just like changed the game entirely. And OKC is really good at being physical. So the fact that Minnesota can be more physical like that, I think that says a lot. And that's a key component to basketball right now. It's not about how much you can get away with physicality wise, but it's just a part of the game right now.
Yep.
So I think that's, I think you're kind of opening my eyes here. It is a very important part of, evaluating prospects and projecting to the next level.
Right on. So Kyle, I want to ask you now, just kind of a broad, this 2025 NBA draft class in particular, what do you feel like the strengths of this class are? And then conversely, like if you needed something like as an NBA team and you're like, okay, cool, we're coming into this draft. Oh no, we don't see this in this class. Like what would that be? What would you say the weakness of this class is?
Yeah. The top of the class is super strong. Obviously Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, two guys who I bet confidently are at some point going to be future all-stars. I think there's a lot of question marks beyond that. One thing I've noticed, I think it's kind of interesting. This is kind of the year of the one and done. I think the top 10 picks in this year's class could all be one and dones. That's a bit different than, the last couple drafts have been number one picks from internationally. The strengths, I think, of this class are probably, I think if you look at the top 5 projected picks, this is not necessarily bared out, but I think there's a lot of depth among bigs, among centers in this class. And I think that if I'm looking for any different big in this class, I think I could get pretty good value on them. Like you have guys who can play above the rim, who check off the archetype as like a lob threat, a rim runner, someone who has size and can block shots like a Common Malawach, like an Asa Newell, like those type of players above the rim, those type of archetypes. And then you've got like the low center of gravity, like Derek Queen and Danny Wolf, who win with skill. They win with feel. They're maybe not the above the rim athletes, but very good passers for their size, can be like playmaking hubs for that position. I haven't mentioned Thomas Sorber. There's a lot of depth among centers and big men in this class in general. So I'd be really, really excited. Like, for example, OKC picking at, I believe it's 15. Could be
15,
14.
yep.
Yeah, 15.
Yep.
I'd be super happy if I'm picking at 15 and I'm OKC, a potential NBA champion. They have a lot of depth already. And, oh, by the way, like Danny Wolf or a Derek Queen could be available at number 15. Like,
sure,
I would be super happy about that because I think he's, either of those guys, still very young. I think could end up, contributing at a really high level early in their careers for a team that's obviously contending at the top of the NBA right now. And also, like, they may be looking to establish some depth and getting some size in the front court for the pipeline, depending on what happens with Chet, how our Hartenstein shakes out. So I'd be really excited if I'm in the market for bigs in this class, because I think there's a lot of really impactful players with different skill sets in this class. I think if I'm scared of one potential position that I'm needing, I think it would be wings. And I don't know how you feel about that, but once you get past Flagg, who I think is, basically a wing, Bailey, Kon Knueppel, who may be more of a 2-guard, it gets fairly dicey in terms of at least projecting like future starters, I think.
Yeah.
You've got Nick Clifford, you've got Liam McNeely, Drake Powell, Carter Bryant, Will Riley. Like, I think this
Cedric
draft,
Howard, the combine standout.
There you
right?
go. Yes.
Yep.
I think this draft will separate the real from the fake in terms of like teams that have done the work and have done the scouting and are prepared to take chances on guys, because I think there's a lot of polarizing opinions among some of the wings in this class. And that is a position that is at a premium in the NBA. Every single team needs wing depth or, size at that position, someone who can defend and shoot. And so it's going to be interesting. Like, I think it's going to be a litmus test to see, like, where does Drake Powell go? Where does Carter Bryant go? Where does Cedric Howard go? Like, those guys could end up going higher, just because I don't feel confident once you get past kind of the first couple of tiers. I think that the depth at that position specifically could drop off a little bit. And there's going to be a lot of guys who end up, making some impact in the NBA, but, not a lot of confidence in some guys once you get past, the guys that I mentioned, maybe once you get to the second round.
So I love the fact that you started off with, you feel like the strengths being the big, and you talked about a handful of them there. I would even be excited about, as a late first rounder, getting like a Ryan Kalkbrenner out of Creighton,
100%.
Janai Broom coming out of Auburn. You might be able to snag him with like an early second round pick this year. So I do agree with you. The depth of the big man, big Sorber guy over here. Love Sorber. I have him inside my lottery, flirting with like that 11 through 13 range. I love him to pieces.
Yes.
I think he's a really good basketball player. I also love the fact that you called out the wing position too, because I think that that's going to be totally based on the scout, where there could be some guys who have a Drake Powell as a first rounder because he's already has such high defensive prowess. He's young, so you kind of have a long runway to kind of develop him within your organization as well. There's going to be guys who I think are going to go higher in this draft compared to consensus because of the scarcity of need within certain positions. And that wing group, I think, could be that. Kyle, you talked about Cooper Flagg, and we're actually going to talk about Cooper Flagg. I feel like a lot of NBA podcasts, they're like, all right, Cooper Flagg, you're cool. Great. We're done talking about you now because we know how awesome you are. I want to get your kind of overarching opinion on Cooper, because for such a young player, he had a fantastic year. And I think sometimes we see these one and done guys, they'll come in and they can still be like the standout top NBA guy, but they don't have the sort of collegiate season that we just saw Cooper Flagg had. So Kyle, I want to get your opinion as someone who watches all aspects of basketball. What makes Cooper Flagg such a special player in both terms of how he dominated college and then how he projects as an NBA player?
Well, the fact that he's the youngest prospect in this class and the consensus number one player, I think says a lot. Like, this is a dude who, very well could have, just finished his prom. And instead he's leading Duke to 35 wins, a Final Four. They were number one in offensive efficiency, number 5 in defensive efficiency. He led the team in rebounds, assists, blocks, minutes, steals. I think the interesting thing with Flagg, Steven, is like he just kind of wins in a way that is different, right? Like, I think you go back to some of the other top prospects over the years, like a Victor Wembanyama, like a Zion Williamson. Both of those guys had this wow factor, this like, I'm not Gen Z, but I will use the word aura about them.
Yes.
And I think he comes off kind of boring. He's maybe not on the floor, but off the floor, he's more reserved. He's not someone who has a huge personality necessarily. He's just so consistently good at everything. That's what I love about him. And I think on the floor, he does have some sass to him that I really like, where he plays with an edge. And this is getting into kind of like the body language doctor, but
love it.
I mean, just I think his teammates feed off of him and his energy and his confidence, which is just, it bleeds into everything he does on the floor. We did a scouting report at CBS Sports, and they asked me like, what are some weaknesses? What are some things that he needs to work on? And you're like, I don't know. I'm like sitting here grasping for straws. Like, I don't know. Like,
haircut. I don't know.
I mean, like, I would love to see him maybe grow a beard, add a mustache, like,
get a sleeve tattoo.
Yeah. And 2 games specifically where he didn't come up big in late game situations. It's a super small sample size. First of all, I dug into the numbers, and like in terms of clutch situations, he was among the best in college basketball. Now, 2 of the games where he came up short, they were high profile situations.
Yep.
He plays at Duke. It's a big spotlight. That happens.
And he
but
wanted those situations too.
he wanted them, and they trusted him because the numbers bore out that he was the most productive player regardless of situation, and especially in clutch late game situations. So, maybe it didn't work a couple times, but like there's not really any holes in Cooper Flagg's game. So I think his upbringing is very interesting too. He's from Maine. Call him the main event.
Yep.
He just has dominated and produced at such a high level for such a long time. He's not overly confident, but he certainly carries himself like, hey, I'm that dude. Look out for me. And if I'm the Dallas Mavericks, I am just absolutely over the moon thrilled because you don't get to pick. But in a vacuum, I'd probably rather have a Cooper Flagg over a Luka Doncic, someone who's going to be a teenager on a rookie scale deal. You can build the plane around Cooper Flagg, and a guy who's on a cheap deal who I think is going to contribute to winning very early, because defensively, I think he's one of the more complete defensive prospects that I've seen. And, on offense, obviously, as I mentioned, led the team in points, assists, steals, just does a little bit of everything. So I don't know I'll throw it back to you because I'm interested what you think, Steven, like the Cooper Flagg situation. I know we can kind of overtalk his greatness, but like, what do you think stands out and makes him such a special prospect? Because I do get, maybe it's because I talk about him so much, but I do get the sense that like people have just overlooked him in some way because maybe he doesn't have a huge, gigantic personality, or he doesn't make the flash plays that a Zion did. But he's an awesome, awesome prospect, right?
Yeah, he certainly is. I think that I probably feed into this comment as well, so I'm certainly not letting myself off the leash here. But I feel like in the NBA draft community, if we establish that, like, all right, this guy is great, we want to move on and find other interesting people to talk about. We want to find those spots in our big boards where we can argue 5, 6, 7 people, because we know that Cooper Flagg is going to go off and be good. So I think that's probably why the discourse around him has been so stale. And I think too, to your point, the personality probably plays into it too. I forget where I heard this, but like even his commercials all just exemplify how much of a competitor he is. You know what I mean? Like he's dribbling a basketball for New Balance. He's doing this like AT&T commercial where he's screaming in a nursing home playing bingo. Like he's doing all these just ultra competitive things out of nothing. So I think that probably plays a factor into it. But I think what makes him great, and I value this whenever I'm scouting, is in-season improvements, because I think a lot of the times where you want to project, right, this is where the potential comes in, where you can say, okay, this guy might have experimented with his handle. He didn't score, but look, we have this amount of volume demonstrating that he's growing comfortable dribbling the basketball and getting these shots off. So although his percentage might not be great, he's working on it. If he continues to work on it, we can see the percentage goes up. That's how I think potential works in the minds of a lot of people, Kyle.
Yeah.
But for Cooper Flagg, he came in, it's like, all right, this dude is a defensive ace. He's going to come in and just be a dominant defender. His offense has a little bit of a ways to go. Dylan Harper's probably going to be the more complete player because Dylan Harper's offense is a little more polished. We saw Cooper Flagg come in and just grow into a primary shot doctor. And then also within the same season, a lot of people were like, Duke doesn't have a point guard, right? Well, yeah. Cooper Flagg ultimately ended up becoming the team's go-to scorer and point guard, on top of living up to that defensive kind of profile that he came into the year with. So that's why I think he just like flat out showed that he was the number one prospect, even with that kind of billing coming in. And that's why I think I'm so comfortable projecting him not only just as like the number one player in this class, but he can rival almost any other number one, pick out of any draft class, just because the work ethic we know is there. All the character stuff we hear about him is excellent. And we see in-season improvements. That's hard to do. It's hard to grow your game in multiple areas. Usually that's like, okay, in the offseason, we're going to work on this one aspect. You're going to come in and show that improvement. Cooper showed it throughout the season. Is that something that you kind of noticed as well, Kyle?
Yeah, for sure. And I think just kind of to put a bow on this, like the most interesting part of that is the progression, the development, just straight linear, and doing it under the microscope as the guy that everyone has already anointed as the future number 1 pick, as the guy who's going to be scrutinized as the face of Duke, easily the most watched and probably fairly easily the most hated college basketball
People
team.
hate Duke. I don't.
Yeah, just breaking news here on the No Ceilings. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, it's I think to do what he did under the circumstances under which he played makes it all the more impressive. Progression and development is not always linear,
Sure.
but for Flagg, like just straight linear the last year. And like we could talk a lot about Flagg, but pretty easily the number 1 prospect in this class. And I think there's a lot to be really excited about.
For sure. All right. So we're not done talking about Duke, though, Kyle, because you just gave me a couple days ago a list of prospects that you are really in on. And one of those being a fellow Dookie, Kon Knueppel. Now, recently, the Duke wing listed at about 6'5", 219 pounds, 6.5 or 6'6.5" wingspan, will be around 19 years old on draft night. Kon has recently been mocked as high as 3 to like Philadelphia because of like the construct of that team and maybe the team needs. I think Kon is benefiting from like a late rise within the draft community. What makes him such a great prospect in your eyes, Kyle?
The shooting. I mean, just like when you can be one of the best knockdown shooters in the class, there's going to be a lot of value. I think probably a little bit of hindsight scouting too. Jared McCain should have gone higher last year.
Yeah.
And so, part of it I think is like, he's not a Jared McCain, certainly. I think they're very different prospects, but
sure.
41% 3-point shooter last season at Duke, 90th percentile on jump shots, 92nd percentile catch and shoot, really good finisher around the basket. And he did an interview, I think it was during the NCAA tournament where someone asked him, like, how do you find your success? And he's basically like kind of just talking down on himself. Like, I'm not the most athletic person, but I find ways to win. And the king of playing off 2 feet, I think he's just so good with his pacing. He's so good at kind of understanding the pacing and, how to control his body, control the game within the game. And, I think the numbers bear that out pretty well, like where, he's not an above the rim finisher, but he's a really good finisher once he gets around the basket because he is so crafty, because he is so smart with his handle, and he knows how to leverage his body off of defenders. He knows how to head fake and to go and sell. So there's a number of different things that he does at a really high level that makes me feel very confident that he's going to be a very good NBA player for a long time. I don't think it's crazy if Philly decided, hey, Ace Bailey's awesome. Hey, VJ Edgecombe's awesome. But we're going to take Kon Knueppel at number 3. Like, I think it would surprise people, sure, but I don't think it would be the craziest thing to happen just because he is such a good shooter. And I think there's so much more to his bag beyond just him being a shooter. But the fact that I think clearly he's such an elite shooter, like that would fit in so well with what Philly has right now with Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain. Like, just add some of the most skilled offensive players and try and figure it out. It'd be super fun. I think his stock is interesting where 3 feels a little bit rich.
Sure.
But, I did a mock earlier last week, I think it was, and talked with Adam Finkelstein, who's, one of my colleagues at CBS Sports. He works for 247. And, he's like, 5 is a little bit rich. And I'm like, are we sure? Like, is that maybe an overreaction just based off, this is a guy who was listed at 6'8". He measured at 6'5". Now let's overreact a little bit, because I think in a vacuum, you look at what he brings to the table, both on offense and I think defensively, he really competes at a high level.
Sure.
That Duke team was top 5 in defensive efficiency last season. And that was, we can credit Cooper Flagg for a lot of that, but Kon, I don't think was, a weak link by any stretch. So yeah, like, I think he's a really interesting prospect too. I have top 5 on my big board right now. I don't know if he'll go top 5, but like a Charlotte would make a lot of sense for him. I think Philly would make a lot of sense, although number 3 does feel a little bit high. I don't know. I'm kind of all over the place, like with where I see him projected, because, I think I see him somewhere in that probably 5 to 10 range. And I think anywhere in that range is excellent value for what I perceive to be the best shooter in this year's draft class.
I think that that's totally fair. And I think sometimes what the draft community will do is they'll look at like a team specific need, but also if you kind of put it out there and you get past the initial, like, what do you mean? We haven't been talking about Kon Knueppel at 3 forever. And then a couple people just kind of chew on it and they're like, well, I mean, is it really that crazy? Because I mean, you got a guy who stepped in for Cooper Flagg whenever he missed some time due to injury, right? And played the Cooper Flagg role. Duke really kind of still connected and hit on all cylinders when he was in there doing that. A guy who rebounds pretty well, 2.0 assist to turnover ratio. So you got a good decision maker, guy who competes on the defensive end. We already know that he's going to come in and shoot. A 3, I'm with you. 3 is a little rich for me, but if it's Philly, like maybe his floor is a little bit ready-made to compete on a team that's got high aspirations. So I think that you're really having like the floor ceiling conversation, I feel like, with Kon Knueppel a little bit.
And I'm watching the comments in the YouTube show. So if you guys are watching this live, please leave us questions, leave us comments. We'll try to respond as we go. But someone, BTB said, I just wonder about his upside. And I think that's like a real question, a comment, like something that people are just generally discussing related to Kon Knueppel, because you look at Kon Knueppel and you compare him to like an Ace Bailey, and in a vacuum, you see Ace Bailey, 6'8", great shot maker, the athleticism, jaw dropping, some questions about his defense, but like you can see, if you kind of squint your eyes, you can see Ace Bailey, potential future all-star, some shades of Tracy McGrady to him. And Kon Knueppel, you think like, it's not really a sexy game. He doesn't win with athleticism. He's not going to overwhelm you with his length necessarily. So I do think like there is a lot of things to consider when you're scouting, you're evaluating the top prospects. And in particular, Kon Knueppel, I think, is interesting because he's not the huge upside swing that maybe, some of these guys at the top of this draft could be, like
a Trey Johnson, who's kind of similar. Yeah.
Like a Trey Johnson. Absolutely. You're bailing me out here. But he's like, I think there's a ton of value in drafting a guy who you have a ton of confidence is going to be a really good NBA player for a long time. Maybe he's not an all-star. Maybe Kon Knueppel is just a really good starter. But at number 4, like having the security, knowing you're going to be getting a really good starter who might be the best shooter in this draft, like, I don't know, man. If I'm an NBA GM and like my job is quite literally staked to this decision, the idea of drafting Kon Knueppel sounds pretty nice. And that's why I could see myself talking my way into drafting a Kon Knueppel at number 4 or number 5. Look, I'm not an NBA GM. Maybe there's a reason for that, obviously, but I think there is just a kind of a discussion when you're talking about upside versus floor when it comes to Kon Knueppel. I don't know if it's fair or not, but that is, I think, undeniably tagged to kind of when we're evaluating him. The floor versus ceiling argument consistently kind of pops up with Kon Knueppel.
All right. So, Kyle, I want to ask one more question here from the audience that came in, Tavares, and just shout out to everybody who's tuning in live. Really appreciate y'all coming and hanging out with us. So, Tavares asked, what should the Spurs do with Harper, that being Dylan Harper? By all accounts, every report that I'm hearing, Kyle, you can confirm this or not, based on what you're hearing, sounds like the Spurs are kind of going to do what they typically do and just get the better player here and go with the Dylan Harper. So there's the question with guys like De'Aaron Fox already on the team, reigning rookie of the year, Stephon Castle. You put a guy like Dylan Harper in there, you might get a little bit redundant. What do you kind of feel about that situation?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The Spurs, obviously, we're not anticipating picking at number 2 in this draft. This is a luxury pick for them in some ways. De'Aaron Fox, a midseason acquisition for them. He plays on the ball. Stephon Castle, a really, really quality prospect who was rookie of the year last season. I think both of those guys are going to be foundational pieces for what they're building long-term, alongside obviously Victor Wembanyama. I think if you're the Spurs, you probably just select Dylan Harper. For me, I have Cooper Flagg in his own tier in this class, Dylan Harper in his own tier, and then there's a teardrop again. So I think once you start prioritizing fit over talent, that's how you end up making the mistake of drafting a Marvin Bagley over a Luka Doncic, for example. I don't see the Spurs being an organization that would make that type of mistake. So I don't think they're going to reach for an Ace Bailey at number 2, or, a VJ Edgecombe at number 2, or even a Kon Knueppel. Like, maybe they would fit their current roster better, but I think they would still continue, especially at number 2 in this draft. You're going to bet on the best talent available at that spot. I think it's going to be Dylan Harper. The Spurs publicly have said they plan to keep this pick. And if they do keep this pick, I would expect it would be Dylan Harper. I will say I did a mock draft at CBS Sports this last week, and I went through the scenario of what it would look like if the Spurs did something different, which is parlay this pick, the number 14 pick, along with the treasure trove of a bunch of assets to go and get Giannis Antetokounmpo. For me, that would make a lot of sense. I think it'd make a lot of sense for Giannis, make a lot of sense for the Spurs. It'd make a lot of sense for the Milwaukee Bucks. It'd be a win-win-win, possibly, for all parties. I don't know who says no to that necessarily. We are seeing right now, I think, a real-time possible shift in the NBA where stars are obviously important. The Thunder are the NBA favorites to win the playoffs right now, and they have a star in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But, oh, by the way, they have maybe the best depth in the NBA, and I think depth is going to be kind of the new flex in the NBA. So I think the Spurs, seeing this play out, this playoffs play out right now, that's probably at least a consideration. Like, do we trade a Devin Vassell and some of our depth pieces who we really, really like and cash it in for a star to pair next to Victor Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox and a Stephon Castle? Like, that's an amazing nucleus for sure. And I think I would do that every single time and just hope that I can get the guys around them to be good enough. But I think it is a real question, because Harper would come in on a rookie deal. He wouldn't have, the potential injury risk with Giannis being a little bit older. He's had some knee issues. I think he's been very durable for a very long time, but we're talking about someone who's not often available in the trade market, and potentially him being available next to Victor Wembanyama, that would make a lot of sense. So
it'd be so scary.
It'd be so. I mean, it would just be awesome. As someone who lives in Oklahoma City, like, I was kind of hoping that OKC could pair Chet and Victor together, just because, like, I don't know how it'd work, but sure, I would absolutely love to see it. So yeah, I think, like, in the end, the Spurs probably just stick and pick. But I will say that just like the public statements, I'm not entirely sure I would just ride home with it. I actually think that the Spurs have some decisions to make. They will think long and hard about, packaging that pick or maybe some other picks and some players to try and go get a star, because Victor Wembanyama, De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle are players who I think that's a nucleus that is ready to compete at the highest level right now. You add, another playmaker, another star to that mix, and suddenly the West doesn't look like it's OKC's to dominate for the next 5 years.
Absolutely. And I could see the argument too. Like, let's say the Bucks are like, nope, we're keeping Giannis. Giannis is like, I'm happy here. Yeah. And they keep the pick. I could still see them going with Harper, because if you look at the playoffs now, you can't have too many ball handlers on a team, guys who can do the whole dribble, pass, shoot, multiple angles attacking the defense, because they're going to try to cut off the water to Victor Wembanyama when the Spurs are in the playoffs, right? So who else do you can have that can make responsible, smart, heady decisions in the playoffs? Dylan Harper absolutely projects to be able to do that. So Kyle, I want to transition now to an in-state prospect that pretty contentious within the draft community. And I'll even add to within the No Ceilings community. We have people at No Ceilings who are really high on Jeremiah Fears for obvious reasons. The production at his age, the usage at his age speaks well for him. But then you look at the efficiency and the small guard stuff, which is where some other folks here at No Ceilings are a little bit lower than. But Jeremiah Fears, Oklahoma guard, measured in at 6'2.5" without shoes, which was a great sign for him. Just under 180 pounds, will be around 18 years old on draft night with the 6'5.25" wingspan. Kyle, why are you in on the Jeremiah Fears experience?
Well, because my job security is not tied to drafting him or not drafting him. That's at least in part. He's a scary prospect. I will absolutely give him that. I think, in this draft, there are a lot of guys who I feel confident about. Fears is not among the guys who I feel confident in projecting. Like, he is a very volatile prospect who has an interesting profile where there's a lot to like and there's a lot to be a little bit nervous about. But I think he's an underrated athlete. Having watched him this last season at Oklahoma, he's so smooth with the ball in his hands. He can get downhill and get paint touches. He can pretty much get wherever he wants on the floor. There's some questions about his shot. He shot, 28.4% from 3-point range last season. The turnovers were a smidge high, especially, for someone who's primarily the ball handler, and his usage rate was so high last season. 4.1 assists per game last season, but the turnovers nearly the same, 3.4 turnovers per game. Some questions about his defensive ability at the next level, and also some questions about like his role. When you lead your team in usage rate and you put up the production that you do, I think there's some questions just because the shot, can he play off the ball at the next level? Yeah. Can he do things beyond what he did as a freshman at Oklahoma? But I think probably having him as a top 10 prospect in this class, it probably reflects more on my philosophy when I'm projecting prospects and evaluating prospects, which is I'm always trying to swing for the fences. I'm always trying to hit on a guy who has the highest possible ceiling. And as someone who's a public talent evaluator, I can do that knowing that, I'm not drafting a team that if this prospect or this team or, this roster that I put together tanks, I'm going to be out of a job. Like, I know that sounds like kind of harsh, but if Fears is a miss,
reality, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, if Fears is a miss, I can just move on, like I can be like, okay, I'll learn my lesson.
Yep.
Here were the red flags. Here's what I ignored. Here's what I liked. And here's what I can learn about moving forward, scouting these types of similar prospects. But, I think there is some real star power with Jeremiah Fears. There's a lot to like. He is one of the younger prospects in this draft class, someone who reclassified up, was very productive in the SEC, which had the best season in its history last season. OU made it to the NCAA tournament with him leading the way. And again, going back to what we talked about earlier, do you have like an elite skill or an elite skill set or a trait that you can build around? I think his ball handling ability is so good that you can build around that. And I'm projecting a little bit that the shot will eventually come around. And, I think some of the clutch moments that he had at Oklahoma may be what we could see in the future for him, just because he always called for the ball when the game was kind of hanging in the air, and consistently he delivered at a really high level.
Yep.
Making clutch shots and big shots. So I love seeing that as someone who's 17, 18 years old. And I think long-term, I'd be thrilled drafting Jeremiah Fears, as high as number 5 in this draft. Somewhere in that 5 to 10 range makes a lot of sense for the OU guard.
I love it. So his usage that he had a usage percentage of 31.9, which actually tied for 21st in all of college basketball for players who had a minutes percentage of at least 40. So you're looking at a player who high roll, high usage. You love to see it. The turnovers were high, but as you said, the age and youth has a little bit to do with that. Played in the most athletic conference in all of college basketball too. With that, he also had a really high assist percentage at 28.6. So even though the turnovers were up, he's still making good reads, still a positive assist to turnover ratio. He got to the paint a lot with the free throw rate of 51.8, had 215 free throws on the year, was second on his team, only behind Jalon Moore, and with 14 and ones. He rebounded really well, which speaks to the physical capability that he has to survive at the next level. Rebound is historically like one of the most projectable things for pro players. So it's good that he rebounded well. Had a 3.1 steal percentage, which is ridiculous. And even though he was 59th percentile in at-rim attempts, he was 31st percentile at the frequency of scoring at the rim, which is a small number to compared to like 100. But if you look at some of these other guards in this class, he laps them at his frequency to score at the rim. So there's some really positive markers that he has to where you could really feel good about projecting him as a pro. I think the biggest like crimson mark that he has on his resume right now is the 3-point shooting, but you're looking at a guy who's a good free throw shooter. He was also in the 78th percentile scoring in the mid-range. So he does show some touch. He does show some ability to score away from the rim. I think that if you're high on him and you're projecting him to be so high, is that you feel confident that the 3-point shot is going to fall in line with where he is at the free throw line and at his mid-range.
That's right. Yep. And, having talked with Finkelstein several times about fears, I think we've come to an agreement on him, which is like insanely high ceiling, bottomless floor, true boomer bust prospect. And like, we'll see what happens. I don't think anyone's confident in projecting him one way or another. Like, I'd be scared to take him at number 5, but also like at the same time, I'd kind of be scared to pass on him too. Like, just, I think the star power, the potential is really there. He's an underrated athlete. He does a lot of things that I really value at a high level. And so, yeah, like I'd like to see him develop his shot a little bit more. I'd like to see him become a weapon playing off the ball, developing his shot, cutting more, just all of those things. He wasn't asked to do that at Oklahoma. So, certainly a guy who I don't think will be a big contributor early in his NBA career, but I think in a couple of years we could look up and he could end up being one of the steals of this draft. He could also be one of the huge busts of this draft. I think that is Jeremiah Fears' case kind of in a nutshell, just a very volatile prospect who extremely boom bust. So I'm excited to see kind of where he lands. I think the situation for him is going to be very, very important because I think whatever team takes him has to be very committed to setting up a program to develop him the right way, making sure he's in the right system, doing the right things. And yeah, I can see him having a successful NBA career for sure.
I love it. All right, so let's go to another guy who is pretty all over the place on draft boards. The perimeter player out of BYU who measured in at 6'8" and a quarter without shoes, just under 200 pounds, will be around 19 years old on draft night. He was 6'10" and a quarter wingspan, measured in at Egor Demin. Kyle, I'll let you know, just like Jeremiah Fears, there's some people who are super duper high, some that are super low. I get the appeal of having a like gigantic facilitator, right? With Egor Demin. What about him just kind of speaks to you as like being one of these like high end ultimate upside players?
Yeah, it's basically like I think he's the best passer in this draft. I'm scouting him. I'm projecting as a true point guard at the NBA level. And that's what I like about him. He's so good with the ball in his hands, assist rate, pushing 35% as a true freshman at BYU. BYU, one of the most fun offenses to watch down the stretch of last season. And that was in no small part because Demin came on really, really strong. It wasn't necessarily bore out in the counting stats, but just whatever he was involved, when they put the ball in his hands, that consistently translated to success for BYU. I think I did a study a couple weeks ago, and it was like for every game that he had 6 or more assists, BYU was like 19-1 on the season or something. Like they were clearly better when they just turned the keys over to Egor Demin. And that type of talent as a elite passer with excellent vision, who has a gigantic frame at 6'8" plus, I think that can translate. Obviously there are some questions about a lot around Egor Demin. He's very right hand dominant. I think the shooting numbers not super great. We talked about Jeremiah Fears just a minute ago, but 27.2% from 3-point range last season, below 70% from the foul line. Some indicators that are maybe a little bit troubling, but
Adam Finkelstein actually had a comment that he made on the show too, that he had a question on his defense. He didn't think that Egor could guard you. Did you take that as like a compliment to you or an insult to Egor? A little bit of both. How did you feel about that?
Fink is a hater, so unquestionably it was a little bit of both. I think he just hates Egor Demin, but he also couldn't not take a shot at me. So yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. He is like a little bouncy when he's kind of playing defense. I've noticed that. Like, he doesn't really sit down in his stance, and he'll get on an assignment, and he's just kind of hoppy, just kind of like a rabbit. There's just a lot of like fundamental stuff on defense that I think he just probably needs to work on. He needs to improve his foot speed. I think he could stand to gain, like 20 pounds of muscle. He just looks very slender.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, again, like someone who I really like to bet on. Someone in the chat said future Portland Trailblazer Egor Demin. I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. And just like I typically value, possibly overvalue, players who have really good size, really good feel for the game, and really good passing, like a Denny Avdia, who's with the Portland Trailblazers now. He's someone who I was always really high on as a prospect, and it didn't work out early in his career, but I think he's starting to come on a little bit. Like the smarts and the ability to just be able to have that pass, shoot skill of doing just a little bit of everything, I think can translate to success at the NBA level. If he can grow his shooting, if he can add some meat to his frame, I think there's a really good chance that Egor Demin becomes a foundational type of prospect in this class. So I think people right now are probably all over the map with Egor Demin. Finkelstein had him like at 27 in a mock a week ago, and I was absolutely roasting for him. That seems insane. That seems insane.
I don't think he would go that far. Like, even if teams are out on him, like, I don't see him getting outside. It would be hard pressed to see him outside the lottery. Even outside the top 20 would be pretty crazy based on, the way the conversations are going right now.
And I love Finkelstein, so I'm only giving him a hard time because I do love him. And he even admitted, like, okay, he probably actually won't go that low. But like, I think that kind of expresses the wide range of views around Demin right now. Like, I think people around his camp are putting out that they're very optimistic. He's had a great pre-draft process. Like, he could go in the top 10. He's impressing a lot of teams. And then also
shooting really well in these videos that are coming out now.
Of course. But also, like, there's some, people who are like, I don't know. I think I'm just kind of out on Egor Demin. Like, people are just completely all over the map for him. Of course, like, probably the best evaluation for Demin right now is probably somewhere in between. Like, I think he's probably late lottery, mid-teens, someone who's going to be a really good NBA player, not a future all-star, but not a total bust. That's probably most likely in the range of outcomes for Demin. Just the size intersection with his passing. It was like someone who I would be willing to, I think, take a chance on. Like, for example, Wizards at number 6.
Yep.
Hell yes. Let's sign me up. That'd be fantastic. Like, Brooklyn at number 8. They've got 4 first rounders. Why not? Just make a YOLO pick, bet on Egor Demin. I
don't think he's French enough to play for Washington yet, though. So
you may be right. You may be right. He maybe is a little bit too Russian, Egor Demin, to be in Washington. But if we could change his name, Egor Kulabale or something like that, he'd be a great Washington Wizard. The Spurs, Deminyama, like, the Spurs would be kind of interesting. Like, I know we talked about, the Spurs maybe having a cluster of guards, but man, that'd be a lot of fun. Yeah, like I think, again, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, the specific fit would, I think, have to be very good for him. I think, again, a team has to be kind of thinking longer term when it comes to his development. That's why a Brooklyn at number 8 might make a lot of sense. They have 4 first-round picks. They're not necessarily in win-now mode. They could try and think longer term about his development and his future. That type of situation, I think, would fit him well. And yeah, and just in a couple of years, like, he's someone who I think maybe he doesn't have a rookie of the year type campaign.
Sure.
And I wouldn't totally be out on him. Like, I think in a couple of years we'll have a decision to make, but someone who probably is not going to make an early immediate impact in the NBA.
Or maybe he has kind of a trajectory, what we saw with like Josh Giddey in OKC, where he had, a team with low expectations. He got to kind of grow in his role a little bit more. All right, so Kyle, last guy that we're going to talk about, probably one of the most seldom discussed players. And I think a lot of people were really surprised that he outright declared, didn't test the waters, but Drake Powell out of North Carolina, kind of a wing / forward. I think if you're projecting him forward, measured in at 6'5¼ without shoes, just over 200 pounds, around 19 years old on draft night with a 7-foot wingspan. Kyle, what do you think about Drake Powell? Because he's not a guy with a lot of, I would say, like a well-rounded body of work right now, but kind of a budding guy, but very young, kind of still unproven. Why are you kind of high on Drake Powell?
I'm still cackling at a comment in the chat. Someone said, Jan Behringer, number 6, is their type.
That's true.
For Washington.
And
that's
Essengu with the Eiffel Trio.
Yes.
in
God.
Washington.
Oh, that would be glorious. That would be glorious. Yes. Drake Powell from North Carolina is the topic. He's an interesting prospect. Like, I think that's the right way to put it. He's an interesting prospect. He didn't produce at a high level at North Carolina last season. And at the NBA Combine, like, he was basically fairly blunt about it. Like, I felt like I wasn't in a position to completely showcase myself. I have a lot more that I can do that I didn't necessarily get to show at North Carolina. I'm buying hook, line, and sinker what he's selling, because like the flashes that he shows at North Carolina and even predating that, going back to his prep career, I think just scream NBA role player at a really high level. He was 7.4 points per game last season, shot 38% from 3-point range. His defense and his shooting, I think, are kind of the foundational cells of why I like Drake Powell. 38% from 3-point range, 81st percentile on catch and shoots. Earlier this season, I was doing like some evaluations for just wings in general. I skipped from watching Ace Bailey defensive clips to Drake Powell defensive clips.
Oh, okay.
And my God, buddy, God,
a little bit, right?
That totally shocked my system. And Drake Powell is just awesome to watch. He gives so much energy and enthusiasm on that end of the floor. And, I think just a winning type of skill set, someone who had a low usage rate last year, but I think there's a lot to his game that is going to translate to the NBA. His defensive versatility, his size, his athletic testing at the Combine, completely through the roof. I mean, just wowed with some of the stuff that he was doing, his leaping ability. I think all of that shows up on tape, where defensively, I think he's going to be able to defend multiple positions. He's going to have a lot of versatility on that end of the floor. And then the shooting, I think, is going to end up translating. I don't think he's going to be someone who you're going to put the ball in his hands and go ask him to get a bucket, at least not early in his NBA career. And, I don't think he's someone who's going to be taking dribble jumpers or being necessarily versatile shooting off screens. I think he's a smart cutter. He's someone who can make open shots on catch and shoot situations. He's not going to be wowing you with his production, but I think a guy who's going to be a winner at the NBA level. Someone in the comments said a Tumani Kamara McDaniels type of player. I love that. I think that's exactly the archetype that has succeeded at the NBA level, and the archetype that I'm hoping that Drake Powell is, where, he's not going to necessarily go and hunt his stats. he's just all about winning. He's all about contributing and starring in his role, not necessarily just starring. So what can he do to contribute to winning? His defensive intangibles, his energy, his infectious ability on that end, and then the shooting and just being able to make shots next to a primary creator. I think there's a lot of upside for him, for Drake Powell, in this year's class.
I love it. I think that if people were going to point at any one, if I had to pick like one statistic to look at, that's kind of like my big red flag, is that his usage was only at a 13.3, which is like very, very low.
Yeah.
But if you look at that sample, though, I mean, good free throw rate for someone who's not really driving and attacking the rim a lot, still rebounded really well. 1.6% steals percentage and a 2.8 block percentage at his size is great.
Mm-hmm.
The 3-point efficiency, like you mentioned, was around 38%. That was on close to 6 attempts per 100. So a good volume, not like a Kon Knueppel, but still good volume. Still finished well around the rim. Had 6 of his 9 dunks were in the half court. So that kind of speaks to his ability to lean into that athleticism and also just create easy looks for himself, right? Cut well off the ball, 95th percentile scoring on cuts, 88th percentile scoring in isolation. So a lot of small sample sizes within those numbers, but I think the film matches what we've kind of seen with the athletic testing and with what we see in his pre-college film as well. So I think he's going to be, for a team like a Brooklyn, I know we keep talking about them, but for a team that's got 4 picks, like if you can get a Drake Powell with one of those last 2 picks, in the back half of the first round, I think that could be like the ultimate pairing with one of these premier ball handlers and then hopefully another kind of big man. And then you can pair Powell with those types of players. I think that you're looking at, if they were to ever make the playoffs, Drake Powell is doing a lot of these like winning type plays that we see from teams like New York or Minnesota or Oklahoma City, doing that type of a thing.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of kind of alluring landing spots for Drake Powell that would make a lot of sense. Orlando has 2 picks at 16 and 25. Like,
sure,
25 would make a lot of sense there, depending on which direction they go at number 16. Utah has a pick at number 21. Again, a team that is armed with multiple first-round picks, potentially like kind of a huge swing after picking at number 5 earlier in this draft. Like, there's a lot of potential outcomes for Drake Powell that I think would make a lot of sense. North Carolina was an absolute mess last season. I will just say that.
Yeah.
Like, that team, I know probably people don't watch a ton of college basketball on the channel, or maybe they do. Maybe I know you watch a lot of prospects, people
yes.
who are watching. So I'm sure you probably did watch a lot of North Carolina, and just probably a lot of people pulled their hair out because that was just an awful team to watch. RJ Davis and Elliot Cadeau. Very, very ball dominant. Cadeau, like a non-shooter who was ball dominant. And, I think that probably ended up hurting Drake Powell's chances and reflected in the low usage rate, the low counting stats. Like, it was just a weird put together team. And so I think there's something to that. But like you mentioned, the ability to get downhill and some of his dunks, like, he's kind of a bulldog and some flashes in just creating, going downhill and attacking the basket. Like, he's a freight train. He's really hard to stop. Someone called me out here, which I appreciate. His pull-up shot is ridiculous. It's almost as high as Ace's. Small sample, I think, but yeah, like I think that highlights the shooting in general. I think is very, very underrated, and just the fact that he didn't average, 15 and 7 for North Carolina. I think a lot of people are just out on him. We talked earlier about like development is not linear. Someone who is a 5-star prospect with his pedigree, a lot of people expected him to come in and be like a borderline All-American. That wasn't the case. It was a weird situation. It was a very weird fit. It was a weird year for North Carolina overall, a weird year for Drake Powell, but I'm buying stock if you're selling. Drake Powell is a guy who I think should be a first-round pick. I think he will be a first-round pick, and someone who, the last of the prospects that we're highlighting here, I am very much higher on than probably consensus.
Okay, if I could ask for like a range where you have him, would you mind sharing that?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, my prospect big board is on CBS Sports. So I don't do any gatekeeping here. I have him at number 26
Okay.
on my big board. And I think that's probably about where he ends up going in this draft, the 20 to 25 range maybe. That range in the draft is like pretty fluid right now. So yeah,
I agree.
I thought I was higher on him than 26 actually, to be honest, but
well, maybe you just need to update it. Maybe that's
I think you're right. Yeah, I need to do some update. I keep talking myself into Drake Powell, and I have him at 26. He needs to be at like 18 for me.
Okay, I love that. And I think that once I get to like 20 on my big board, you could make a strong case for like 15 to 20 prospects that they could be in the first round. And I'm like, sure. Yeah, like that's a pretty wide range to me.
For sure. Yeah, I'm just looking through here. Like Yaxel is in there, Tahad Pettiford, Raynaud, Walter Clayton. Like there's just the 20 to 35 range is always very, very fluid.
Yep.
This year feels like that's especially the case.
100%. All right, Kyle. So that wraps up the prospects. And that was the last question that I had for you, brother. I just want to thank you so much for your time and your willingness to want to come on the show today. Before we let you go, do you mind sharing where people can kind of find and follow your work or any future projects that you kind of have going on?
Yeah, dude, for sure. Thanks for having me on. Would love to join you guys again at some point. I want to talk with Maxwell on some prospects as well. That man always has some takes. So I appreciate the No Ceilings community. I love you guys' work. I've talked with Nathan several times, but I shout you out on the last mock draft episode that we did. Follow you guys throughout the season. You guys turned me on to, I think it was Raynaud, who I just mentioned a minute ago, but like you guys always seem to be a step ahead of me. So good job on the scouting. You guys are just always grinding. It is much appreciated. Duly noted. Follow CBS Sports. My work is there. I'm on Twitter occasionally and Blue Sky, Kyle Boone or Kyle Boone, however you look it up. I don't have Facebook. I don't have Instagram. I don't have Snapchat. But yeah, we'll be following the NBA draft over at CBS Sports. Oh, CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page. Go like and subscribe that. Me and Adam Finkelstein every week talking the NBA draft leading up to the draft. We do some mock drafts. We did a sleepers episode this last week. A ton of fun. We try and get as deep as possible, like the Draft Sickos episode here, just talking about the NBA draft because it is our joy. We love to do it. And the people who are listening, who are watching right now on a Sunday night of Memorial Day weekend, we do it for you. We do it for you. We appreciate you.
All right. Well, Kyle, man, thank you so much for the kind words. I didn't pay him any money to say that, by the way. That was out of his own volition. So thank you very much for the kind words, Kyle. And likewise for all the audience. I'm sure they already are. But go follow Kyle and Adam and all the great work that they're doing. But for us here at No Ceilings, Maxwell, who obviously isn't here, he has a fun interview coming out with Arthur Kaluma, who just finished up his career playing for Texas. So an interview with him, an article coming out with him as well. I'm going to have 2 pieces coming out this week. It's going to be kind of a mini series called Should You Be Worried? It's going to be part 1 and 2, where I look at NBA past, present, a little bit of future, kind of letting NBA fans of specific teams know based on where they're picking in this year's draft, whether or not they should be worried. I had a lot of fun putting that together. I got to pull on a bunch of strings, like how drafting Serge Ibaka eventually turned into Oklahoma City.
Love it.
Getting Shea and J-Dub and stuff like that. So a lot of fun walk down the NBA memory lanes doing that. And then Friday, the No Ceilings draft guide is dropping. So please make sure that you are following us and subscribing to get that. We put a lot of work in there. I'm not just saying this, but this is going to be our biggest draft guide that we have ever put out. So please make sure that you are following us for all that. But for our No Ceilings family, for my co-host Maxwell, for our incredible guest Kyle Boone, we love you all. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll catch up with y'all next time. Much love, y'all.